Imagine it's 1885. You're an average cowboy who just got paid for the month. Hollywood has always made it seem like everything was cheap in the Old West. The truth is very different. $1 back then is worth about $35 today, but most workers were barely getting by. Let's do the math item by item, converting everything into today's prices. Get your wallet ready, and your disappointment too. Number 1. Average salary of an ordinary cowboy. $25 to $40 a month. That was all a cowboy got after working from sunup to sundown. 7 days a week, riding horses that could kill you and dealing with storms in the middle of nowhere. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking about something between $1,000 and $1,600 today. Now think about this. Before he even saw a dime of that money, a big part of it was already spoken for. The ranch charged for food, for broken equipment, sometimes even for the rope you used. A lot of cowboys got to the end of the month and found out they were in the red. They worked 30 days straight, just to literally owe money to the boss. And here's the detail not many people know. There was no formal contract. If the ranch owner decided to pay you less, there was no one you could complain to. No bank, no receipt, no rights. You either took it or left it. And even so, thousands of men chose that life. Number 2. Now imagine showing up in a town like Dodge City or Tombstone looking for a place to sleep. A simple room with no luxury at all cost between $8 and $50 a month. Adjusted to today, that comes out to something between $320 and $600. Sounds cheap, right? The problem is that an average worker made about $30 a month. So rent alone was already eating up nearly half of what the guy had in his pocket. And don't think it was anything decent. We're talking about a cramped room, no ventilation, full of bed bugs, and sharing a thin wall with noisy strangers. A lot of people couldn't even afford that and ended up in shared bunkhouses, sleeping shoulder to shoulder with people they didn't know. Others just threw a blanket on the floor of a saloon for a few cents. Having a roof over your head in the Old West was a luxury most people could barely afford. Number 3, let's talk about food. And honestly, there was nothing glamorous about it. The basic menu for a worker in the Old West came down to beans, bacon, stale bread, and black coffee. That cost between $10 and $18 a month, which today would be something like $400 to $720. Just to eat the bare minimum. A kilo of dried beans cost 25 cents, and a lot of people lived on little more than that. Salted meat, which was what most people could afford, spoiled quickly in the heat and caused serious stomach problems. Diarrhea was so common in mining camps that nobody even talked about it anymore. And here's the part that really hits. A lot of miners ate just one meal a day. Not by choice, but because the money simply wasn't enough. You worked your ass off all day and could barely fill your plate once. Number 4, drinkable water. Today, you turn on the tap and don't even think about it. In the Old West, clean water was almost a luxury item. In desert regions, a person bought water in barrels, hauled by wagon, paying $2 to $5 a month, which would be about $80 to $200 today. And keep in mind, we're only talking about drinking water. A lot of people with no money or no access drank straight from the nearest river. The problem was that those rivers were contaminated by animal waste, camps, and even mining. The result was devastating. Cholera and dysentery killed far more people than shootouts. Historians estimate that waterborne diseases were responsible for a huge share of deaths during that time. So when someone says the Old West was dangerous because of outlaws, the truth is that a simple glass of water could be a death sentence. Number 5, transportation. Today you complain about gas prices. But imagine having to spend between $12 and $20 a month just to keep a horse on the road. Sounds cheap, right? But adjusted to today's values, that comes out to between $480 and $800. And keep in mind, we're talking about a basic horse here, nothing special. A really good horse cost a fortune that most people couldn't even dream of having. Now here's the detail not many people know. In many parts of the West, the hay to feed the animal cost more than the food you put on your own table. That's right, the horse ate better than the owner. And not having a horse just wasn't an option. The distances between towns were huge, with no decent roads, no shade, and no guaranteed water along the way. Anyone who tried to make those trips on foot was truly risking their life. Many died from exhaustion and dehydration trying. Number 6, in the Old West, going around unarmed was basically an invitation to the grave. A box of 50 bullets cost around 75 cents, which sounds cheap. But the problem is that nobody bought just one box. Between target practice, hunting for food, and self-defense, an average man spent between $3 and $7 a month on ammunition alone. Adjusted for inflation, that would be something like $120 to $208 today. And here's the detail people don't talk about much. Many workers made around $30 a month. That means in some cases a quarter of their pay was gone just to keep their revolver loaded. And even after spending all that, there were no guarantees at all. Outlaws, wild animals, and land disputes were constant threats. The hard truth is that many people put almost everything they had into lead and gunpowder and still didn't live to tell the story. Number 7. Whiskey was practically a form of currency in the Old West. A shot cost between 5 and 10 cents, which sounds like nothing. But here's the detail nobody talks about. Most workers didn't have 1 or 2 drinks. They walked into the saloon after a brutal day and stayed there until their pockets were empty. By the end of the month, an average guy blew between $4 and $10 just on booze. Adjusted to today, that comes out to between $160 and $400. Sound like not much. Consider that many of them made around $30 a month. That means nearly 30% of their pay went straight over the bar. And it wasn't even good whiskey. A lot of what they served was a mix of grain alcohol with coloring and even tobacco. To give it color, they called it rot gut, and the name said it all. Even so, it was the only escape many of them had from the loneliness and the harshness of that life. Number 8. Poker and faro were the most popular forms of entertainment in Old West saloons. A cowboy spent between $5 and $15 a month at the gaming tables, which today would be something like $200 to $600. It sounds like a small amount, but consider that the monthly pay for an average worker was around $30. That means some guys were gambling away half of what they earned at a single table. And here's the detail not many people know. Most of them didn't lose little by little. They lost everything at once. A man would sit down with $1 in his pocket and walk away with nothing just minutes later. Faro was especially tricky because it looked simple, but the house always had the advantage. A lot of professional gamblers were actually cheaters, and getting caught cheating at cards could cost you your life. Even so, the tables were full every night. Number 9, bathing and hygiene were luxuries that very few people could afford in the Old West. A hot bath at a barbershop or hotel cost 25 cents, which sounds cheap, but that's about $10 today. Anyone who could spend between $1 and $3 a month on hygiene was already considered well off. Adjusted to today's values, that comes out to between $40 and $120 a month just to stay minimally clean. Most workers took a bath once a month, if that. In mining towns like Deadwood, clean water was so scarce that several men used the same tub, one after another. Soap was an imported item and expensive. The result was predictable. Lice, fleas, and scabies were part of everyday life for almost everyone. Barbers didn't just cut hair, they also pulled teeth and treated wounds. Cheap perfume existed, but it was used more to cover up the smell than for anything else. Hygiene, as we know it today, simply didn't exist back then. Number 10. Today, you walk into a store and come out with new clothes without thinking twice. But in the Old West, things were very different. A simple cotton shirt cost about $1, which sounds cheap until you remember that a worker made between $25 and $40 a month. Boots were even worse. A new pair could cost as much as $8, nearly a third of a month's pay. That's why most men wore patched-up boots that had to last at least 3 months. Heavy canvas pants were sewn and resewn until there was nowhere left to put another patch. Altogether, keeping a basic wardrobe that could handle hard labor cost between $6 and $12 a month, the equivalent of $240 to $480 today. A lot of cowboys and miners simply worked in torn clothes because they had no choice. Changing shirts was a luxury very few could afford. Number 11. Tobacco was just as essential as food in the Old West. A plug of chewing tobacco cost about 15 cents, which sounds cheap. But by the end of the month, the total came to between $2 and $4, something like $80 to $160 today. And look, it wasn't a luxury or some rich man's habit. Cowboys chewed tobacco all day because it helped fool the stomach when there was no food around. Imagine spending 12 hours in the saddle under the blazing sun with an empty stomach. Tobacco was what kept a man going. Hand-rolled cigarettes were common too, but chewing tobacco was more popular because you could use it while working with both hands. Cigars were for men with money, saloon owners, or poker players. For the average worker, that little pack of tobacco was basically a survival item, not a pleasure one. Number 12. Getting sick in the Old West was almost a death sentence, not because of the illness itself, but because of the treatment. Doctors were rare in small towns, so most people depended on medicines sold in general stores or by traveling peddlers. And what was in those bottles? Mercury, opium, and laudanum, which is basically opium dissolved in alcohol. A man with a toothache, an infected wound, or syphilis spent between $3 and $8 a month on those substances, which today would be the equivalent of $90 to $200. Mercury was prescribed for syphilis and caused slow poisoning, destroying teeth, kidneys, and the nervous system. Laudanum eased the pain, but created brutal addiction within weeks. A lot of people started with a few drops and ended up unable to function without the bottle. You paid to get addicted and poisoned at the same time, thinking you were getting cured. Number 13. Renting an extra horse or a wagon. Imagine being stuck in the middle of nowhere with no transportation. That was a death sentence. Renting a horse or a wagon cost between $8 and $14 a month, something like $200 to $500 today. And keep in mind, it wasn't just any animal. A lot of stables rented out old, worn-out horses that could barely make the trip. If the animal died or ran off during the rental, guess who had to pay? You. The contract was clear. If you came back without the horse, you paid the full value of the animal. Some people lost everything that way. And without a horse, you couldn't haul supplies, you couldn't work, and you couldn't leave. You were literally stuck in a dusty town, spending the little you had until you went broke. Transportation in the Old West wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between living and disappearing. Number 14. In Old West towns, the law worked very differently from what people imagine. A lot of sheriffs were paid so little that taking a little money on the side was almost part of the job. For $2 to $6 a month, which today would be the equivalent of $80 to $240, you could buy an officer's silence. Saloon owners paid to keep illegal gambling running. Brothels operated openly because the sheriff got his cut. Even cattle thieves could slip by unnoticed with the right amount of money in their pocket. The interesting detail is that in many towns, the sheriff was the only representative of the law for hundreds of miles around. If he decided to look the other way, there was simply no one else to enforce order. That meant justice in the West literally had a set price. Number 15. In Old West saloons, a dance with a girl cost 25 cents. Sounds cheap, but the trick was that nobody stopped at just one. A whole night could cost between $3 and $8 a month, the equivalent of up to $320 today. And there was also what they called special attention, which went for 50 cents, without much explanation in the records from that time. The real problem was that cowboys made around $30 a month. So a man who went to those saloons regularly was burning a good chunk of his pay just on company. And a lot of them did exactly that. Records from towns like Dodge City and Tombstone show that it was common for men to spend everything in a single night of fun and go the rest of the month without enough money to eat properly. It was literally a choice between a plate of food and a few minutes of company. And most of them chose the company. Number 16. Here's a detail not many people stop to think about. In the Old West, a simple knife, lasso, or pickaxe cost between $4 and $9 a month. Sounds cheap, right? Today that would be the equivalent of something between $160 and $360, and the problem wasn't just buying it, it was keeping it in working shape. The steel back then was poor quality. A pickaxe used in the mines might last only a few weeks before cracking. A leather lasso would dry out and snap in the desert sun. And when a tool broke, work stopped. Simple as that. Without a knife, a cowboy couldn't prepare food, cut rope, or do much of anything. Without a pickaxe, a miner lost a whole day's earnings, and the merchants knew that. In the more isolated towns, replacement prices went up fast because demand was guaranteed. Nobody had a choice. You either paid what they asked or sat there making nothing. Number 17. You think paying taxes today is bad? In the Old West, on top of the city's official taxes, a lot of business owners also had to pay so-called protection fees. Basically, a crooked sheriff or an armed group would show up at your saloon or ranch and tell you that you had to pay to keep things running peacefully. If you refused, well, you usually ended up with serious problems. These payments ranged from $1 to $4 a month, which sounds cheap, but adjusted for inflation, that comes out to something between $40 and $160 today. And that was just one of the many expenses eating up an average worker's pay. The worst part was that there was nobody to complain to, because in many cases, the ones collecting were the town's own lawmen. Now imagine dealing with that while making $30 a month. Number 18. You think a bed with clean sheets is something basic, right? Well, in the Old West, that was considered a luxury. Most workers slept in filthy bunkhouses, sharing straw mattresses with bed bugs and fleas. Anyone who wanted a room with an actual bed and clean sheets paid between $10 and $18 a month. Adjusted for inflation, that comes out to something between $400 and $720 today. For a cowboy making around $30 a month, spending half his pay just to sleep clean was unthinkable. So the reality was rough. A lot of them just threw a blanket on the dirt floor and slept like that. White sheets and pillows were for bankers, saloon owners, or well-established ranchers. Everyone else made do however they could and hoped they wouldn't wake up covered in bites. Number 19. Adding up everything a man needed just to stay alive in the Old West, the cost came to between $45 and $80 a month. Adjusted for inflation, that would be something like $1,800 to $3,400 a day. Now here's the real problem. An average cowboy made between $25 and $40 a month. Do the math. The pay simply didn't cover the basics, That means most of these men were already starting the month in debt. Local merchants offered credit, but they charged interest that would make any modern loan shark look generous. A lot of men got trapped in a cycle of debt they could never break. They worked for months straight without seeing a dime because everything was already spoken for. And anyone who couldn't get credit faced something even worse. They went hungry, got sick with no treatment, and many times simply died in silence out in the middle of nowhere. The hard truth is that surviving in the West was a luxury very few could afford. Number 20, let's be straight here. In the Old West, the average cowboy made about $30 a month busting his body from sunup to sundown. Now, a saloon owner in Dodge City could make that in a single Saturday night, selling watered-down whiskey. Bankers in San Francisco were lending money at interest rates that went as high as 5% a month. And the big ranchers in Texas controlled stretches of land as large as entire states on the East Coast. Richard King, for example, built up more than 600,000 acres. The man was practically a king. Meanwhile, the ranch hand taking care of his cattle could barely afford a new pair of boots once a year. Wealth in the West didn't come from hard work. It came from whoever controlled the land, the credit, and the trade. The system was brutally simple. A few people kept almost everything, and everyone else worked themselves to death just to survive. Number 21. Now add up everything we've seen and think about the average worker back then. A cowboy made around $30 a month, which today would be something like $1,200 to $1,600. That sounds reasonable until you look at the prices we showed here. Rent, food, ammunition, clothes, medical care, transportation, all of it together easily went over $2,500 to $4,000 in today's money. In other words, the math just didn't work. Most people lived in the red, in debt to the boss, the saloon owner, or the town store. That idea that everything was cheap in the Old West is pure Hollywood fiction. The reality was a system that kept workers trapped. You busted your ass all month under the sun and dust, and at the end of it, you still owed money. These 21 facts prove one thing the movies never show. Surviving in the West was a luxury that almost nobody could afford.